Welcome to this DisNewsYouKnowPodcast. My name is Marlon. I'm aiming this sound capsules to participate in news in the UK, to explore the stories and give a little opinion. Though there are news sites out there for disabled news, disabled people, news affects our lives, it's still underreported, and generally, as many of us already know, we are underrepresented in the media. So the name of this podcast is an effort to try and address the balance. So the first story is from the BBC, and it's MPs now back legalising assisted dying in England raised by 23 votes. MPs vote to back a bill legalising assisted dying in England and Wales by 23 votes. Bill sponsor Kim Leadbeater said she's quote over the moon as the bill will now give terminally ill patients a choice and dignity where they might not have otherwise had it. Opponents of the bill expressed dismay over it clear in the comments, with the Not Dead Yet UK campaign describing the vote as a setback but not the end. But the journey of the bill isn't over yet. It will now head to the House of Commons, where peers are expected to debate it further. So we'll just give a bit of opinion there. To wait, I think the news. This is the news that's had people been dreading. But on the other hand, as already been stated, it's not ratified. The bill's been ratified, so it's go through the House of Lords, and I think there'll be a lot of back and forth, and there'll be a lot of amendments to be made when to any bill that finally comes out. But I still think, however, we will see a assisted dying bill of some shape or form in the coming year or years. If I'm being honest, I think this has been a long time coming. I know that I'm personally worried about it as a disabled person and for the disabled community as a whole. I do understand the other side. The coin for people who feel they need the right to a dignified death. To feel that there's a lot of disabled people that may find themselves adversely affected by such legislation. And I think in terms of dignified death, I think that many people worry that they'll get no such thing. At least not to say people don't have strong advocacy to speak for themselves or don't have a voice, and or social standing and economic means to speak up for themselves. I say social standing and economic means because there are plenty of disabled people with the knowledge and articulation to advocate for themselves, but still don't get listened to in every. Whilst other people worried about dignity in dying, a lot of disabled people still fighting for dignity in living. I mean, can't even a lot of disabled people struggle to get with accessible transport. I mean, we talk about the House of Lords. There's a peer in the House of Lords that I think it was last year. Disabled peer, Tony Gray. Was it last year? I think it was. There's reports that she had to crawl off a train because of the inaccessibility. There wasn't any assistance to support to get off the train. So, forgive the community for being a bit apprehensive, but we're still struggling with accessible transport in 2025. I mean, talk about safeguarding to ensure that people are protected, but I think this is a massive, massive, massive task. I think the mental capacity is going to have to be almost redefined. Well, not redefined, but there's the court protection, etc. and so forth. There will need to be a whole entire kind of arm of it that looks at assisted dying and the tests, etc. and so forth. And I don't just think it's a capacity that people make decisions. I think the whole holistic environment and people around the individuals who need to be looked at, and relations and the financial aspects, just like all the stuff about fears of coercion stuff. You need to be real vets around in terms of the context of how the person got to that decision and who's around them, who's influencing the decision, etc. and so forth. I think there's a whole holistic assessment needs to be made over a period of time to make sure it's safe. I think it's an easy process to try and navigate and create. I don't know what safeguardings are about Dignitas and what they require in terms of someone making a decision and for them to go ahead and support them. But I'm guessing it's going to be very, 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 very rigorous and needs to be. And the Department of Health, like the NHS, I think they'll need a whole new service in terms of dealing with this. Supporting this, because I don't think can just leave it to as it is, leaving it to GPs or consultants, etc. I think it's, obviously we all know NHS is overwhelmed as it is, but I think with this being introduced, I think it's going to be a whole new set of funding needed for the legal infrastructure, but also to facilitate the process as well, and the relevant professionals involved. And whatever the new legislation and service and how it's delivered when it comes through, and whatever safeguardings are in place, politics and social climate will forever muddy the waters. In a climate where the media and political messaging is that there's no money, there's lack of housing, lack of public funding, lack of NHS beds, doctors, nurses, endless waiting lists for those suffering incurable illnesses, who lack affluence, status, purpose, who rely on the public purse, as it were, for benefits or accessible housing or social care in their own home or care or nursing home. I can understand the fear of a psychological shift in mindset from wanting to live to feeling like a burden, especially if society's been telling you your whole life that's the way it is, especially for many people long-term disabled. I think I don't know how you police that. Well, I'm telling everyone's story, but a lot of the prominent campaigners I've seen in the media, for instance, dying, and again, I'm not got anything against them, because that's what they believe. They should have the right, and I respect that right from their perspective. But a lot of them have got incurable illnesses or terminal illnesses or progressive illnesses that became disabled later in life. What I worry about is, say for instance, someone with a life-limited condition who was born with that life-limited condition, and they lived in the climate, as I said, with benefit cards, with social care cards, etc., lack of accessible housing, all the lack I just described. It's a psychological shift for a lot of those individuals, and whether they will be I don't know how the access to assisted dying and the environment around them, and the influence of how when that legislation comes through, if it almost probably will, how that influences the rest of society's attitude towards disabled people with lifelong progressive illnesses. That's what worries me. And whether there's a soft coercion that then comes into rhetoric, etc., and so forth. And I don't think all the safeguardings in the world can police that kind of influence, if it does come about. Even outside of this, I think back to cases of able-bodied people who become newly disabled, lost their mobility, feel like their life is over. I mean, where the safeguard's going to be for these devastated individuals who may very well feel the lowest step for like ending it all. After all, remember a case for a young person who was paralysed and travelled to Digny's house and supported to end their life. The tragedy of that case will never leave me. I think it was a young lad who was paralysed after an accident in Rugby, and I always felt that, yes, they had dignity in death, but I felt as felt like they were never shown or given the tools, time and support to attempt dignity in their new life circumstances. And to me that will always be the last of this debate. And like I said earlier, many people are campaigning for legislation are lucky that they could have had it inside. They've put many disabled people are still fighting for dignified life. And in the kind of more goods, and as I already said, and where in the last 14 years at least you've seen all the freedoms disabled people fought for the previous of the last 30 years in terms of community care acts and the DDA and more access to education, housing, accessible housing, employment opportunities, etc. and so forth. All that seem to be slowly being stripped away from us in the last 14 years over the cuts that have happened with the coalition, etc. and so forth, and the Tories, and then again now the spectre of the cuts. There was a bit of a stopping feel to it, but I guess we just need to keep speaking out, and it does have an effect, because it was only a few weeks ago that 100 prominent disabled people wrote that open letter to Keir Starmer that was highlighted so powerfully in The Guardian, and it has had an effect, because since then you've had, no MPs were against the cuts and were always willing to rebel, but the groundswell of kind of them speaking out seems to have increased since that letter came out, and also that in itself, that demonstration, the fact that there's 100 people, I'm not defying celebrities, but the fact that they're prominent disabled people that have been able to achieve in public life, not that that's the marker of any disabled life. It's life itself, living life itself, but the fact that they are prominent disabled people shows what disabled people, if they wish to, and are given the right support, can achieve, and it flies in the face of cutting all that infrastructure away. Not that it's already not been cut to a significant degree, but cutting even further. That kind of flies in the face of all that. But hopefully, campaigns keep speaking out will at the very least see crucial safeguards put in place for this act, so that if it does come into force, that what many disabled people feel to be the future won't be legislation that affects them in a overtly negative way. But second story is from the Spitting News Service, and its ministers are secretly considering means testing PIP. DWP meets despite pledging Green Paper. Labour ministers are considering whether to start means testing personal independence payment, which is likely to cut billions of pounds a year from benefit spending. New information is good from Department of Work and Pensions has revealed. The highly controversial idea would mean payments contributing to extra disability-related costs in future only going to those less than a certain level of income, savings and investment. It comes as the government's new universal credit and personal independence payment bill, which aims to restrict eligibility to personal independence payments, people and cognitive disability element of universal credit received its first reading in the Commons. That bill does not include any measures to means test PIP, and the Pathways to Work Green Paper published in March insists that PIP will remain an important non-means tested benefit for disabled people and people with long-term health conditions. But behind the pledge, ministers, special advisors and civil servants have been discussing whether PIP should soon be merged with universal credit. The information came in response to a freedom of information request from welfare rights expert Finkini, who had asked the DWP for copies of reports produced since Labour came to power last July that discussed the potential possibility of making PIP a means tested benefit. You noticed that various members of Labour Cabinet, including Works and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall, had repeatedly linked PIP to work, even though it is available for disabled people both in and out of employment. When DWP responded to his request, it admitted that he holds information relevant to the request, but he refused to release documents taking advantage of the Freedom of Information Act exemption that protects the private space within which ministers and their policy advisors can develop policies without risk of premature disclosure. It admitted there was a legitimate public interest in understanding the rationale behind proposed changes to disability benefits, including whether and how the department has considered the option Then added, the information requested includes early stage analysis and internal advice directly informing the policy development, releasing the material prematurely which is distorting public understanding of the policy direction, especially where proposals are still evolving and subject to change. It could also lead to undue pressure on decision makers or misinterpretation of ideas that have not yet been fully, but not yet been finalised or endorsed. Response to that. Obviously we don't have full clarity on this, but I can't say I'm surprised that this is something they'll be considering, if indeed they actually are. These are benefits got saga. To me, anyway, first got right to the bottom, and eventually we'll get there. As I said previous story, indeed the last episode, it's hard not to be cynical and think there's a agenda against disabled people because we're being politically gaslit. Do more with less, or increasingly do more with nothing. As disabled people, as disabled persons, it baffles me how disputed benefits ended up as such a maze. I'm a cynical person, but just because my life experiences have led me to be so, and benefits is big business. It doesn't seem to be because of claimants really, but it is big business for providers, etc. and so forth. For instance, you've got millions in contracts for disabled testers. And it always baffles me that people with lifelong conditions still have to go for tests every 3 years or whenever it is. So key impairments that aren't really going to fluctuate. There's not going to be that much change, or it's not going to improve to a significant degree. And in terms of, for instance, with people, say people, as opposed to the other benefits, it baffles me the amount of money they spend on testing a condition that isn't going to change. Is that about a fair system, or is that about providing contracts to providers? And also they talk about the cost of the welfare bill. I always think ways to end up thinking you commission services with nurses or doctors to test individuals that they see once or one-off basis every few years for a relatively short amount of time. Whoever expert that might be can't possibly grasp the nuances of a complex medical condition or impairment by meeting someone for the first time for half an hour or whatever it is. All you have to do is look at the individual's NHS records to make an assessment of what their condition is. I get that some medical conditions do need testing to fluctuate ones, and so for instance I'm talking about like lifelong impairments, for instance, is I don't understand the testing around that. It's been a long time since I've been to any of the face-to-face assessments, but even they don't make much sense to me in terms of the physical tests that's to do and stuff, in terms of you do a bit of stretching, or I get that they ask you to walk with an aid, or etc. and so forth, but say for instance getting back to work, there's no other tests that, unless they've changed them, that relate to actually any of the tests you do in the day-to-day job. It's not like asking to sort mail or put items of clothing on, or make a bed, or a cup of tea, or any of those tests. That would make some kind of sense, but I get there's got to be some kind of assessment, but the whole thing just seems like expensive. Which one? Story number 3 in BBC: patients of a psychiatric unit given 2.5 million damages. Trigger warning, there's a mention of abuse. This one, more than 50 former patients of a teen psychiatric unit have each been awarded a 5-figure sum in damages totaling more than 2.5 million. The settlement is for patients Hill End adolescent unit in St Albans, Hertfordshire, who was subjected to alleged sexual abuse or mistreatment during the late 1960s to the early 1990s. Stanbridge, 59, who was admitted twice at the age of 13 said the violence was for the sake of it. The Hertfordshire Partnership Unit NHS Foundation Trust, which now provides mental health services in the county, said it was deeply sorry for those people who had been such a traumatic and unacceptable experience. A spokesman for the Department of Health and Social Care said apologies have been issued for the events at Hill End and will do everything in our power to make sure other families do not suffer such an appalling breach of trust in the future. The individual just mentioned said he spent almost 300 days at Hill End after being admitted twice from May 1979 till September 1979 and from March to September 1980. He described his time there as like some sort of experiment he called the staff members using physical violence if they felt children were not being compliant. The claimants have been settled under a compensation scheme launched in July last year by law firm Lay Day on behalf of about 90 former patients. Obviously, sympathies go out to victims that were in this institution, and at least they have some sort of recompense for their ordeal. Obviously, money will never compensate for having experienced such horrific abuse, but as always, there's always a sentiment to hope lessons will truly be learned. Hopefully, they will be learned this time round. And then that story is again from BBC Online. Chronic fatigue is not in your head, it's in your blood, so he expects. People with ME or chronic fatigue syndrome have major differences in their blood compared with healthy individuals, experts suggested. University of Edinburgh researchers said their findings could pave the way for a game-changer diagnostic test. Professor Chris Ponting said, for so long people with ME, CFS have been told it's all in their head. It's not. We see it in their blood. However, some critics of the study say researchers have overstated the significance of their work. The study used data from the UK Biobank health database of over 500,000 people to compare 1,455 ME CFS patients with 131,000 healthy individuals. The research showed the results were mostly unaffected by TIMT levels. The university team said the volume and consistency of the blood differences support their long-term goal of developing a diagnostic blood test. Researcher Dr. Sujad Binges, I'll spell it for you, it's SJOERDBENGES. Sorry, I made that name. Sujad Binges told BBC Radio's Good Morning Scotland. One thing our evidence points to is that ME is very much conditioned in the blood. Perhaps previously held perceptions are not quite the case. It is really not due to inactivity, and we hope that this helps with problems for individuals. It is believed about the symptom. The Edinburgh researchers examined more than 3,000 blood-based biomarkers and accounted for differences in age, sex, and activity levels. The results were replicated afterwards using data from the US. Professor Chris Ponting of the university's MRC Human Genetics Unit said, for so long people with ME, CFC have been told it's all in the head, it's not, we see it in people's blood. So the evidence should dispel any lingering perception that ME, CFC is caused by deconditioning and exercise intolerance. However, some experts have criticised the study. Alan Carson, professor of the neuropsychiatry at the University of Edinburgh, said the researchers overestimated the significance of their work. Professor Carson said, if someone wants to ask, is MECFS a figment of the imagination? Then this study showed it's not. However, to claim blood biomarker differences prove that condition is not all in your head. First, to appreciate that both physical and mental illness show similar types of results. Kevin McConway, Emory's professor of applied statistics at the Open University, said, I think this is an important piece of research, but it's also important to be careful not to claim too much from the findings. There's a lot more to do. I'm not any kind of scientist, so I'm not going to give an opinion on the merits of the research, but I'm just going to take it on face value, and I think for many people with ME, CFC, this research merely tells them what they already know. In terms of easing all in that, and I think in terms of the positivity of this is that research is a step in the right direction to try and defeat some of the stigma that surrounds the condition historically. I would have thought things have got better, but very recently you had the case of a young lady died, and the coroner basically blasted the local health authority. I think it was down south, government and local authority, where they said it was directly linked down to their failure to understand and support her with her ME. So it's about it was changed over the years, and those with ME still struggle to get support from health service, social care. Come back to what we talked about before about the benefits system that's also a nightmare to navigate for a lot of people with ME. So it's hopefully research like this is a step in the right direction to tackling that stigma, and also to kind of towards some kind of cure, or at least indication that it's that you can test for it, because that gives it legitimacy as well for those who are still debunking that it even exists, which is unbelievable in 2025, but there are still some that argue that. So hopefully this again is a step in the right direction. So for this episode, thanks for listening. I hope to see you again soon.